Community-centered, community-supported. Alaska Public Media. Alaska Insight is supported in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers just like you. Thank you.
The 33rd Alaska Legislature has ended, and after some early tension over education funding, lawmakers reconciled differences and passed a budget without going into a special session.
No budget is perfect, but this is a collaborative product in which no one person, district, or region in this state got exactly what it wanted, and that's compromise. Madam Speaker?
What did lawmakers accomplish? What did not get done? And are lawmakers concerned about the governor's veto pen striking again? We'll talk with legislative leadership right now on Alaska Insight. Good evening. The perennial challenges of funding Alaska government services, education, health care, and the permanent fund dividend have become more intense as oil revenue declines, and using earnings from the permanent fund in a sustainable way involves difficult decisions. Now that the legislative session has concluded, what are the main successes of this session, and what remains to be done? Before we start our discussion with legislators tonight, here's a clip from the just concluded session of Representative Delana Johnson expressing satisfaction with the compromise on the state budget.
No budget is perfect, but this is a collaborative product in which no one person, district, or region in this state got exactly what it wanted, and that's compromise. Madam Speaker, and I, for one, I would have liked a larger PFD, but $1,655 was what was achievable in our negotiations with the other body. This is a balanced budget. This is a responsible budget. This is a budget that does not require a CBR vote.
Did not require a CBR vote, of course, means lawmakers did not have to draw down the constitutional budget reserve. We'll discuss the significance of that in a bit. Tonight I'm joined by Senate President Republican Gary Stevens of Kodiak and Speaker of the House Republican Kathy Tilton of Wasilla. Thank you for being here and being available. I am sure that you need a break, but it's great to have you here to help us better understand what happened and what went well, and possibly a little bit of what the plan might be for session 34 next January, although I know that's a long way off and you just got done. So thank you both for being here. Senator Stevens, I do want to start with you. Start with what you see as the successes of this session, and later we'll drill down a bit on some of the legislation.
Sure. Thank you so much, Larry. Good to see you. Good to see you, Madam Speaker. We haven't seen you for a few days. We had a very successful session, I think, in many ways. A couple of things we didn't accomplish, but the big things were a couple of surprises in education that we had to figure out. One was the maintenance of equity issue. The other was the Supreme Court judge who made the decision on spending state monies in religious and private schools. But we succeeded, I think, in many ways. I was very pleased with my caucus. It was made up of Republicans and Democrats, a bipartisan caucus that worked very well together. We were able to accomplish almost everything we wanted with a couple of shortfalls. I'd be glad to explain those later. But I think the big issues were in the area of energy, where we passed a couple of bills that will help us in the future in energy, and we also passed some issues on education that'll help our kids to become better able to read, and by the time you reach the third grade. So we have put some money back into that. So very successful, I think, in many ways. As you know, the governor did veto the funding of BSA, the amount of money goes into education, and we had to deal with that. But I think now we have an agreement with the governor that hopefully he will not veto the $680 that goes into one-time funding, $608 per student. Really, the districts need that badly, and so they're working hard now to try to figure out how to fund education with that restriction. That's only 1 year, not into the permanent, and not permanent. And on the permanent fund, I also agree that was a good choice. We were able to add some monies to it, and it's going to be a healthy permanent fund this year. So all in all, I think a very successful season, and I do appreciate the working with the speaker and the House and the governor, and I think we made many successes this year.
Well, thank you, Senator Stevens, for starting us off. And Representative Tilton, your thoughts about what was accomplished during the session?
Well, thank you, Lori, and thank you for having me here. And hello to the Senate President. It has been a few days since we've seen each other. I feel like it was a very successful session overall, kind of with all the kind of odds against the caucus that we have formed. I think that we came out with a lot of successes. One of the big successes was in the area of safety for Alaskans. The crime bill that was passed through both bodies really focused on victims, which I think is really important. A lot of times we're focusing on criminals, and instead we were focusing on the victims to take care of them. And so I felt like that was a really big gain for our state. We did the energy bills. You know, some people are a little questionable about those energy bills, but I will say that we have to, if we want to be a player in the worldwide market, we have to do things maybe that we might not necessarily like here in Alaska, but will allow us to allow those investors into our state so that we can increase our economy, which is a really big part of what we are focused on here. As far as education, things didn't turn out exactly the way that we went in kind of hot, and we're hoping to make some reforms to education. Those didn't really turn out the way that we had hoped that they would turn out, and fell really short of what we're looking for and what we feel like Alaskans are looking for. So ultimately that bill ended up vetoed, but I wouldn't call that a disaster by any means. We were able to focus on the homeschool bill, which allows 22,000 students in Alaska to continue to receive their funding to go to homeschool and do their homeschooling while we're waiting for the courts to make their decisions. There was also a lot of funding outside of that BSA that is in the budget, the one-time BSA. There was also a lot of funding in the budget for education in different line items, people transportation and things like that. So I don't think all was lost. I think the question is, when you look at the base student allocation, what is the right amount? Senator Stedman brought that up during his discussion. Just because we're such a big state with so many different needs, just knowing what is that right base student allocation amount. So, but all in all, I feel like we had a lot of successes.
And when you go into the session, I'm sure you have a list of your main priorities that you're really hoping to get done. How do you feel about what you were able to accomplish on those things specifically, and what that may mean for the next session? And then we'll follow up with Senator Stevens.
Sure. Our main, the caucus's main goals were really looking in that area of energy, and we didn't get everything that we were hoping for in that area. We had sent over to the other body at a very late hour, I must admit, so their timing to be able to actually analyze the bill was short. It was House Bill 223 that would have just ensured that more of the gas would be coming from Alaskans and not from outside. We had also put a couple of amendments in a few of the bills, but those ultimately didn't make it through. And understandably, from my counterpart, they wanted to see some modeling and stuff. So I don't think that's something that is off the table and that we'll continue to look at. Energy was just a number one priority, I think, for all caucuses, so I'm glad we were able to come together and get that done. In the public safety realm, sex trafficking was something that we were looking at, and we're able to get a smaller version of that in the crime bill, so I think that's a really good thing, and we'll be able to continue to work in that area. Education, of course, but we all have our different viewpoints of what education should look like. We'll continue to work on that as well. So a big deal for us also was just reducing regulation and the regulatory burdens on the private sector. And so we have a few things that might not reach the headlines, but I think were important bills to help with that.
I'm sure that there's always a lot of that work kind of in the background that, as you say, don't make the headlines, but are still important for the future of the state. Senator Stevens, your session priorities that you went in with, and how are you feeling now that it's done in accomplishing those, and what do you think the work will be for next session?
Well, I certainly appreciate all the things the speaker mentioned. Those are important issues we've been working on. As we started this 2-year program. This is the 33rd state legislature, and it lasts for 2 years. And our goals at the beginning, my caucus's goals, majority caucus, were really education, energy issues. We also wanted to deal with pension problems that we're facing. We weren't able to succeed in that. Energy issues, I think we made some major advances there. I have to say, 107, House Bill 107, the House bill that did pass, I did vote against it because my concern was my communities in Homer and Homer Electric and their concerns about what it meant. But hopefully we can move together and try and figure this out and make it work. The other issue was House Bill 50, which had to do with carbon storage. I think we made some progress there. So we have a lot of work to do yet. We did establish, I think one thing I'm very, very happy that we did do was establish a fisheries industry task force, recognizing the terrible situation the entire industry is in, the biggest employer in the state of Alaska. So we have established that task force. And as the Senate President, I'll be chairing that, and the Speaker will be appointing 4 members. I'll be appointing 3 other members to serve on that. And the goal of that, I think, very successful. It could be very successful. Helping us. How can we help the industry? How can we assist in solving some of the problems the fishing industry faces? But back to other things, I think great success in education, great success in the permanent fund dividend, but also I should mention in also protecting the permanent fund. That was a major issue for my caucus, and I know for the House as well, to make sure that the permanent fund is protected and continues to grow. Right now, today, we take a lot of money out of that fund, 5% to run government, and we want to make sure the fund continues to grow. So we did not overdraw from the permanent fund at all, which is really important. And we were able to put an extra $1 billion into that fund to help keep it growing. So that's one great success, I think, is protecting the permanent fund.
Well, Lori, can I just add to one of, I think, the biggest successes that we had in working with the Senate was the transparency that we were able to achieve in the budgeting process, going back to a process where we went all the way through the budget and then had a conference committee. That didn't happen in the first session, and we worked diligently, both the House and Senate, to come up with a calendar to be able to have that process back to kind of the old ways of doing things, but allowed for that transparency in the budget process. And I feel like that was a huge success. And I want to thank the Senate President for, for his body working with our body to make that happen.
All right, well, thank you both for that. Let's drill down a little bit on some of the items. Education funding was such a huge issue early on in the session. Alaskans held rallies and marches advocating for more funding for schools. Here's Representative Craig Johnson, an Anchorage Republican, and Senator Lukey Tobin, a Democrat from Anchorage, at the session to consider overriding the governor's veto of an early education bill. Senator Tobin advocated for supporting the override, while Representative Johnson attributed his no vote to the governor's ability to veto funds during the budget process.
I'm reminded of a movie, and I don't know if a lot of you may not remember this, but it was Clark Griswold. And he was expecting his Christmas bonus, and he's got this big bonus, and he's got this trip planned and everything else, and he opens the envelope, and it's a turkey. Come June, July, when the governor vetoes this, which I don't see any reason why he wouldn't, he's already done it once, I don't want the school districts holding an envelope that says turkey.
Those who are closest to our children know what's best for them. And over the last 2 years, you and I, Mr. President, sat in Senate Education, and we heard from those local education stakeholders. We heard them plea with us to raise the base student allocation, because that is how we help all schools: public correspondence programs, charter schools, brick and mortar, and also the schools that are on our military bases.
The session started off with such great momentum, as of course you both know. Early on in March, there was passage of an education package. There was much rejoicing, and then the governor vetoed it. Lawmakers fell one vote short to override that veto. How difficult was it to regain momentum after that to get the work done that you did get done?
I think that there was enough going on. We knew that we had to work on energy. We also then unexpectedly had the lawsuit happen regarding the homeschooling. Yes. I don't think it was hard to regain momentum. There's a lot of issues that legislators have to deal with. So we just, you have to deal with all of those issues and can't sit and just focus on one thing. Unfortunately, we have several items in front of us that are facing Alaska, so you have to pivot to those things that you need to be working on. We'll continue to work on education, though. I definitely wouldn't say it was over. We continue to have conversations. We filed another education bill in the House that would increase some of the items where we've thought that they have fell short, that just didn't have an opportunity to make it through the system. And a lot of that was because the lawsuit that happened, and then that became a top priority.
Yeah, and we'll talk a bit about that. So Senator Stevens, Senate Bill 140 sought a permanent increase to the BSA, and although there is one-time funding that was equal to SB 140 that was approved, there isn't a long-term solution. What do you both think it's going to take to find that long-term solution? Senator Stevens, start us off.
Well, it's pretty clear that our districts have been suffering, and they're trying to work within the budget they have. And I see, in talking to the 3 districts I represent, the problems they've had without having that BSA monies. What the one-time funding is really not as effective as a permanent solution. So I'm hoping we come back and address it on a permanent basis. It was difficult this year. We weren't able to do that. The problem with one-time funding is that, like any agency, you have to spend the money by the end of the year. So sometimes funds are not spent as wisely as they should have been, and of course you can't. It's difficult with teacher salaries, teachers' contracts, and all if you don't know that money's going to be there next year. So what this truly means is that this coming year, the districts will be in the same situation they were this year. They're trying to figure out how to fund education and not knowing what it's going to be in the future. So I've talked to my districts and told them that I believe that we're safe this year. We put $680 per student into the budget. It's not permanent. It's just 1 year. The governor, in speaking with both Kathy, Speaker, and I, met with the governor shortly before the end of session, and he did say it was not his intention to veto that. So, we have to work with the governor. It's you always forget that it's a separate institutions here. The House and Senate are one institution under the Constitution. We have to work together. Beyond that, we have to work with the governor to make sure that education is permanent, is funded, and it needs to be funded on a permanent basis. So that's the issue we faced. We were short 1 vote in overriding the governor's veto. Pretty hard to do that. We have the toughest override of any state in the country, taking a 3/4 vote in the House and Senate. That's very hard to do. So we were not able to do that. But I think the future bodes well, and I think we'll be hearing from our districts the difficulties they face, and everyone wants to make sure that education is adequately funded.
And Representative Tilton, your thoughts about how to get to that permanent fix?
Sure, thanks, Lori. If you look over the last 6 years, there has not been a meaningful increase in the BSA. So this was our first year as the majority working together, and I think every member wants to see adequate funding for our schools, for our public schools. On the other hand, we also want to see some, responsibility and knowing that our children are getting the education that they deserve. Every child in Alaska deserves a great education, and not every child learns in the same way. So some of the things that we were advocating for were some things to do with charter schools and to make it easier to have charter schools here in Alaska, just choices for Alaskans. So that was part of the things that we were advocating for and looking to have as part of this education fix. I think, like I said, I don't think there's any legislator that does not think there should be adequate funding for education. As I said, there has not been a meaningful increase over the last 6 years. The question is exactly what Senator Stedman had said on the floor was, what is that right number? And I think it's going to take some deep research into, because all across Alaska we have rural Alaska, which has higher costs of power, higher costs for energy, higher costs for housing, and so maybe there is a number that can be met, and then maybe numbers that are targeted to specific things, just to help with those needs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's move on to energy. That's such a big issue. Cook Inlet gas, the rail belt energy situation. This was another big focus. More than a decade ago, there was concern over Cook Inlet gas reserves. Hilcorp bought up leases, squeezed more oil out of aging fields. The concern sort of died down. Then Hilcorp started sounding the alarm about dwindling supplies again. Here's Senator Bill Wielechowski from an interview earlier this year.
But here we are again. And when you look at the prices of natural gas in Cook Inlet, we used to have the lowest cost natural gas prices in the United States. We now have the highest cost of natural gas in the United States. The prices have gone up 400%. We've gone from $2 per thousand cubic feet or less to around $8 per thousand cubic feet. And the projections are that going forward, that number could double in the next year or two to $16. It could potentially even go as high as $25 per thousand cubic feet for some of the gas that we purchase. So these are extraordinary increases, which would be just devastating to the South Central economy, to the economy all up and down the rail belt for individual consumers.
And of course, we had a close call last winter when production almost couldn't keep up with the demand. And the price of energy on the rail belt affects rural Alaska energy prices because the power cost equalization for rural consumers is based on the cost to rail belt consumers. Lawmakers passed a few bills related to energy, the energy costs. Senator Stevens, describe the sort of package of bills aimed at this issue.
Well, of course, you understand that 80% of our population lives on the rail belt, and so that is extremely crucial. I don't personally, I'm not on an island, so I'm not a part of that personally, except that my district, half of my district, Homer and Seward particularly, are very much affected by rail belt prices of gas. So it's a very important issue. We're trying to address it. It's a statewide issue. And I said 80% of our population is affected by gas. So the problem we had is that we couldn't get at first we couldn't get the assistance we needed, the experts we needed, the advisors, the consultants we needed to really let us know what the situation totally is for gas in the inlet. So we now have those folks working on it and trying to find out, and actually the bill that came to the Senate at the last, pretty much towards the end, we really didn't have time to investigate it to see if it was working, to see if in fact the changes that were being made to cooking that gas would actually result in increased production. So it's something that needs to be studied. We are studying it. Hopefully during this interim, we'll learn more and be able to move ahead on the Cook Inlet gas. It's a big problem. We have to find a solution to it. Everyone is concerned about bringing outside gas from someplace else into our system when we have lots of gas ourselves. So we want to encourage those companies that are out there in the inlet to make sure that they move ahead, but also at the same time, we have to make sure that the state benefits from the gas that we own and make sure that we receive something for the state as well. So we made a couple of important decisions. I think House Bill 50 will help. That was passed, and that will make sure that there is storage for gas in the inlet, as well as storage for carbon dioxide, which is one of the governor's plans to make sure that we're able to store gas. And we want to make sure that the state is not gouged in its pricing, so that we benefit as well. It's a complex issue, and we need experts to help us. That's really where we were at the end of session. We're not really ready to move ahead in the Senate. The House dealt with it to a good extent, but we were not able to get the expert advice that we thought we needed to move forward on the Cook Inlet gas issue.
Representative Tilton, your thoughts about sort of this body of bills that did get passed related to this big concern related to energy, and what else you think may be needed to head off spikes in prices in the future?
So the Senate President spoke to a bill that we did send over to the Senate, but albeit in the late hours, so understandable that they didn't have the professional modeling that they were looking for to be sure that it was going to do what it needed to do. That was House Bill 223 that would have helped to give some relief to producers to help bring that gas out of the inlet. So that was one of the things that we had worked on. We had also added an amendment to both of the energy bills that would require that we were not importing gas. And unfortunately, just after the close of the session, NSTAR did file a tariff with the RCA looking to be able to start to do that. And I know that is not something that Alaskans want. Here we are in Alaska with all of the natural resources available to us. So it's really important to us that we're using Alaskan gas for Alaska. House Bill 50 did have, it had the carbon, and it also had something called reserve-based lending in it that could help. So,
all right. Well, thank you both so much for the work that you've done on behalf of all Alaskans. And we didn't get to all of the questions, but maybe we can get you to come back later this next fall in the lead up to the next session and have another conversation. Thank you so much.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you to Representative Tilton and Senator Stephen for their time this evening to help clarify what got done and what's on the horizon for future legislative work. That's it for this edition of Alaska Insight and for our season. This is our last program until the fall. Thank you for joining us, for your thoughtful comments and feedback. Please keep the ideas coming for our show planning for the start of Season 8. Until then, visit our website, alaskapublic.org, for breaking news and reports from our partner stations across the state. While you're there, sign up for our free daily digest so you won't miss any of Alaska's top stories of the day. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Lori Townsend. Have a great summer. Good night.